The second special session concluded this week, and the legislature passed a bill to improve oversight and accountability in policing. The debate in the Senate took place Tuesday in the early morning hours.
Mr. President, the bill that we will soon be receiving from the House is one that is a product of compromise as well as some very good conversation regarding the future of Minnesota policing. Much of this was inspired by the recent death and arrest and death of George Floyd, and it caused Minnesota to think about how our policies regarding law enforcement, the products of arrest, the products of discipline of our police force are being handled, and how at this very instantaneous time after that death, of how we can resolve and get ourselves on a good first step in affecting responsible policing throughout the state of Minnesota.
It provides tools for departments that do need help in developing community relations and developing a better understanding of the environment in which they may be forced to operate. Specifically, the training on mental illness and mental health, autism in particular, is very important for peace officers to understand when they're dealing with people who are having mental issues.
Our work is not done because people are still crying. They're crying for change. And when people is crying, it is our duty, it is our job as legislator to change the law. Law that people will feel safe, and law that are safe for people, and law that protect people and not giving institution the excessive power to abuse.
This bill allows cities and counties to offer incentives to encourage police officers and residents for the communities they work in. Mr. President, we don't think that goes far enough. It establishes a Police Excellence and Improving Community Relations Board under the Post Board, and though we know that was tightly negotiated, we think that there could have been a better chance of adding members to be integrated. As Senator Limmer said, we thought that would have been a better place. It does mandate mental illness training, and we're appreciative of that so that officers are not put in a position to do things that they're not trained to do. We do appreciate the mandating of the autism training. Some of the other things, the duty to intercede and changes to the arbitration process. While the bill was a product of compromise and includes some priorities of the POCI caucus, it lacks the teeth, members, and it lacks the strong, robust policies that build the much-needed trust between the Black community and law enforcement. This bill lacks the critical language such as penalties for bad actors and protections against retaliation who report those bad actors.
We know that this bill is actually not the bill that communities of color want. We have been told that from the very beginning. The communities that are impacted by police brutality want more. They want transformational policy, and this bill is just not that.
This is a compromise bill, and in compromise, those that are involved in the debate don't always get everything they want, and nevertheless, it does reveal that there are issues that need to be resolved in this subject area, and as others have said, this is an important first step.
We did ban chokeholds, except if you're trying to protect the life of that individual or he was protecting somebody else. We did focus on the sanctity of life, recognizing that as police approach situations, we want the least amount of force possible, but sometimes they need a lot of force. We did focus on mental health and autism and how do we address some of those situations so that we don't have moms losing loved ones in those situations. We did have more input from citizens, adding 2 more people to the post board and then forming a citizen advisory committee. But we did not want the citizens to have authority over the post board. Like all boards, this board needed to be run by the professionals within it. So in this case, it's police, and others it's attorneys, and others it's accountants. But we thought it was particularly important to have citizens engaged in speaking to these organizations to make sure that they were the best they could be. We did reform arbitration, which creates the ability to pluck out bad apples when they're not doing their job. That was a big step. And we did offer incentives for police to live in the communities they're from. We didn't want to force them to do that. There are reasons sometimes that police don't want to live in their particular community.
Wednesday, I spoke with Senator Patricia Torres Ray, a member of the People of Color and Indigenous Caucus, who represents a portion of Minneapolis. The final vote in the Senate on the Police Accountability Reform Bill was 60-7. You voted against this bill. On the Senate floor, you said that this is not the bill that communities of color want. Where does it fall short?
There are several pieces that were not included in this bill, and the pieces that were included, in my opinion, were not strong enough. For example, the need to provide training, mental health training, understanding, how to deal with people who have mental health is a very important component of this bill. Both law enforcement and the community wants it. We put some language in it, but there is no funding behind it. That's just a very good example of policy that is there, that could do some good things, but I'm not necessarily sure about how this is going to work. Other pieces are similar in the sense that we have, for instance, in the post board, we have now, will be appointed by the governor, that we will have, in the post board, the investigative licensure actions the subcommittee was composed of 3, and now we will have a larger
advisory council.
Advisory council, and it will include 2 people from the public. The balance in there, in my opinion, is not strong enough right now. We need to have input. It needs to be more balanced. We need to have input from the public that is more robust in order to really be able to make the significant changes that are required. Then there are other elements in there about, that we've tried with the Minneapolis, for instance, model, where we have advisory councils, where we have participation of the public, but then there is no enforcement. There are no tools. What happens if these recommendations actually are not implemented, if they are not adopted? What are the consequences? I think at the core, what this bill doesn't do is really offer that. What are the consequences? What are the ramifications? What are the discipline consequences for law enforcement when they don't comply? And so when you don't have that, what you have, in my opinion, is a lot of good guidance, which is not bad. You cannot criticize guidance, but then it doesn't offer the tools to make sure that if that guidance and that direction is not adopted, then there are consequences. So that is really the main issue for me right now, that I just don't believe that those elements are incorporated into this bill.
So later in your speech, you mentioned transformational policy, and because transformation takes time and can be incremental, and as you're saying, essentially what we have is incremental change, perhaps towards transformational change. Is this a step at least in the right direction?
I think it is. And one of the obstacles that we faced this particular time was the lack of engagement in the Senate. This was a very important process. It was an unprecedented process for the state of Minnesota, where there was significant engagement in the community and very good ideas and support, I would say, in many levels. Many people think that law enforcement was not part of this conversation is the opposite. I think law enforcement really wants to be part of this conversation. They have good ideas. They know what needs to be done. But we did not have a good process that incorporated a conversation between the community, the House, and the Senate. And so as a result of that, these conversations and these negotiations were made kind of behind doors at the last minute, and the only body that really had through conversations with the community, and I stated that in the floor, was really the House. The House actually did have hearings. They did provide the public an opportunity to get input so that we can shape this bill in a way that really respond to these very significant needs that we have today. So for me, it's more of a process problem than it is policy problem, because I do believe that people have good ideas. I do believe that we're capable of implementing those ideas, but without a process, we just don't know what those ideas are. And, I think that the expertise that exists in the House and in the Senate is very limited. We don't have a lot of members who have served in the law enforcement community, to be honest. We have a few attorneys, but we don't have people with expertise. And so we have to make sure that we have a very strong process of engagement with the community to understand what that is.
So speaking of process, the 2021 legislative session will be the next opportunity for perhaps a more robust process. Depending on the outcome of the election, the DFL Senate may be in control. What policies would you like to see put forward in the next session to address some of this?
Law enforcement, for me, is part of the work that we need to do. Is an important part, but for me, law enforcement deals with consequences of problems that we have in our society. And for me to put all of that effort into changing behaviors, changing policy, and changing directions for law enforcement misses a very important piece, which is what happened in the life of an individual, in the life of a community that actually brought that situation to the attention of law enforcement. I want to focus on that too. We have an overwhelming disparities in the state of Minnesota, deep, pervasive disparities that we have not addressed. I am very concerned about the next biennium and the work that we are going to have to do next year during our budget year, when we have a significant deficit that we have to address. We have a long list of requests around housing, law enforcement, healthcare, education, technology, jobs. We're going to have to address all of these needs in the middle of a deficit, a significant deficit. My fear is that we have not begun that conversation yet. What are we going to do? Where are we going to cut? Remember that 90% of the budget is healthcare, health and human services, and education. We don't have a lot of money in any other budgets. Those are it. Mm-hmm. Those are the areas where we have significant needs and where we have the deepest disparities. The conversation about how are we going to address this budget has not even started. I am in the process of writing a letter to the governor to ask him to engage in that conversation, because no matter who is in the majority, they're going to have to make some very important decisions that tie into these disparities, this distress, all of these problems that we face as a state and as a nation, and that as a consequence, we have, all of these issues that we need to address in law enforcement and, safety in our communities. So to me, they have to go together, and we have to make a greater effort to focus on those conversations.
Senator Patricia Torres Ray, we have to leave it there. I want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much.